Welcome into the Wiltfong Whip Around with Steve Wiltfong. Today's Monday, October 7th. I'm your host, Josh Newberg, and we got the best insider in the country, Steve Wiltfong, on the show. We're going to hit on the biggest recruiting developments coming out of an amazing college football weekend. What a weekend it was. Going into the weekend, we didn't expect this. We did not expect this, but we got it. So we're going to break it all down for you guys. All you got to do is sit back for the next 20 or 30 minutes and get caught up on all things recruiting. But first, guys, do me a favor, hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. This is the best recruiting channel on all of YouTube. We want you to be subscribed, so jump on board and hit subscribe. All right. Now, I know some of you are thinking about joining On3. Well, you can do so for just $1 right now. Go to on3.com, use promo code FONG1. Get On3 for just $1. You can read everything. Steve Wiltfong, Chad Simmons, Pete Nakos, all the insiders for just $1. Go to on3.com and use promo code FONG1. All right, let's bring in my guy, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, we had what a week of college football, some major surprises, and it impacted recruiting. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk some Georgia recruiting first as they push for number 1, currently sitting at number 5. But you said on our Recruit Reaction show that you feel Georgia, as it stands right now, considering all things on the board, Georgia actually has the best shot at finishing number 1. All right, so let's start with intel on 5-star plus defensive lineman Justice Terry, probably the most important one of him and Elijah Griffin, one of the most important targets on the board. So how are things going between Georgia and Terry?
Love where Georgia stands. Think they're the clear team to beat for On3's number 2 ranked defensive lineman. Returned to Georgia over the weekend. Knows so many Georgia commits. Has a great relationship with so many players in the locker room. Talks to Trey Scott regularly about how he can improve as a player for his games on Friday night. He has a lot of trust in Trey Scott to get the best out of him as a player. I love the On3 RPM prediction for Georgia. I think it's only a matter of time before he's in the class. Maybe he takes it all the way to the early signing period, but everybody is chasing Georgia for Justice Terry. It was an overnight visit to Athens. He's talked about the brotherhood in the past, how he feels at home, and I continue to like the Dogs for the Manchester High 5-star.
Yeah. Now, we got to talk flip targets in Athens. There's a bunch. Go to Dogs HQ. They have a lot more information on the weekend, but 2 major ones I want to talk to you about. We'll start with Laganza Shady Hayward. Now, he made a decision about 6 weeks ago to commit to Tennessee over Georgia. But this weekend, he was back in Athens. So what are you hearing about this trip?
Well, I talked to Laganza Hayward about his latest visit to Georgia, and he said Kirby knows ball, and having him and Coach T-Rob, Travaris Robinson, possibly develop him into being the best safety he can be really stands out. He called Kirby Smart a prestigious coach and talked about some of the players that Kirby Smart has coached over the history of his career, that track record, Georgia's development. I think that Georgia is a real player in this one. He's going to be back at Tennessee this weekend for the Florida game, so the Vols looking to remind Hayward why he's so high on them. And Tennessee has led most of his process, but when he took his official visit to Georgia the first weekend of June, there was some buzz that Georgia led at that point in time. They're still trying to rally here. And we've talked about it on Inside Scoop, Recruit Reaction, and Wiltfong Whip Around. Georgia's going to get a big flip this cycle. Maybe they'll get more than one big flip this cycle. It was KJ Bolden last year. But Laganza Hayward is someone that's on flip watch as this 2025 cycle continues.
What's this comment? He gave you a quote. Thought it was interesting. Quote, "It was a great weekend in Athens. The environment wasn't like Neyland, but it was cool."
Well, Kirby Smart
is he taking a shot? What's he saying there?
Well, I don't know how big of a factor the environment at a football stadium is going to be in his decision when he stacks it up with player development and other things. But Kirby Smart got on the Georgia fan base for the atmosphere in between the hedges on Saturday. Georgia's been as electric as any program in the country for night games in Athens at big games. And Kirby was disappointed with the way the crowd delivered. It was homecoming weekend, but certainly a lot of people say the best environment in college football is Neyland Stadium. It depends on who you talk to. Some say it's Death Valley, LSU, Saturday nights as well. But yeah, look, he still gave Tennessee's home game experience. Georgia's following that. But within that, he also pointed towards Georgia's track record of player development under Kirby Smart and what T-Rob has done historically, as well as reasons why he's high on Georgia. And talking to Hayward, talking to other people with knowledge of that recruitment, I think Georgia is a factor, and Tennessee's going to have to battle some to keep them in the fold.
Yeah, and next month Tennessee goes to Georgia, so we can probably expect him back at that game, wouldn't you think?
I don't want to speculate. I don't know what his high school schedule is, but certainly him visiting Georgia once already, he could certainly end up on their campus again.
All right, another flip target we got to talk about is FSU wide receiver commitment, CJ Wiley. And, you reported early in the week he was going to be there. There was it was unknown whether or not he would show up. He did, and you actually spoke with his father. So what are they saying about CJ Wiley's most recent visit to Georgia?
Well, he wanted to be there. He had a game on Friday. He had the SAT on Saturday morning. It still made it to Georgia for an unofficial visit for the win over Auburn. I talked to Wiley's dad, as you said, and his dad, who played his college football at LSU, a defensive lineman, said, I think anybody in their right mind would want to be fit for Georgia. Georgia's a recent national champion. They've been dominant in the SEC all these years. Coach Smart and those guys do a great job over there. And they know so many people in the stands from other high schools, other families. They really had a great time spending time with a lot of the top recruits that were at the game. I think Georgia's the biggest threat to flip CJ Wiley from Florida State. Talking to our colleague Rusty Manziel this morning, Georgia Tech's another program to keep an eye on. His sister plays volleyball at Georgia Tech. The elder Wiley told me they're up on the Yellow Jackets campus a ton. He's still going through his process. Florida State's going to have to battle to keep him. I think Georgia's got some momentum in that recruitment. One more flip target I wanted to mention. They had a bunch on campus, but a notable one, Josh, also talking to Rusty Manziel about it, is Anthony Crua. He's a linebacker edge from in-state Marietta. He's currently committed to North Carolina, but Glenn Schumann and Georgia really rationing things up for Anthony Crua. He's another guy to watch here late in the cycle for Georgia. It's the number 5 class in the country. But again, I am projecting them to ultimately finish number 1. Elijah Griffin's visiting next weekend, the number 1 defensive in the country. Love Georgia's position there like I do for Justice Terry. Wouldn't be surprising if Elijah Griffin committed to Georgia this coming weekend. It's his birthday. Maybe he stamps it by becoming a Bulldog.
Yeah. So speaking of defensive line shifting around with Georgia, defensive line recruiting, Stephon Shivers. How did you take his tweet on Saturday morning? He said that he was reopening his recruitment, and in the same breath, he's still committed to Georgia. I see on Dogs HQ, he's still on the commit list, but that sounded like a decommitment to me.
I don't have him in Georgia's class. When all said and done, he visited Vanderbilt on Saturday. I think that the Commodores will be someone to watch. Georgia's got their eye on a couple other defensive linemen. Seven Cloud is a JUCO prospect that's from the state of Georgia, who was on campus this weekend. Georgia's really prioritizing him. I wouldn't be surprised if he ultimately ended up in the class. And then another Florida State commit that they're really pushing hard for is Kevin Wynn. Mm-hmm. He's been back since committing to Florida State in the summer, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's ultimately a Bulldog. There were several other talented defensive linemen that visited Georgia this weekend, guys committed elsewhere, guys uncommitted looking at other blood programs. But those are kind of the two after Justice Terry and Elijah Griffin that I know Georgia would love to have. JUCO, Seven Cloud, and then Florida State commit Kevin Wynn, who's out of Greensboro, Georgia. They already have a special couple of edge rushers committed in Isaiah Gibson and Darren Akinabong. You start adding Terry and Griffin and possibly Kevin Wynn and Seven Cloud. That's a ferocious defensive front to keep Georgia playing the caliber of defense we've been used to seeing them play under Kirby Smart.
All right. Well, I know you like Georgia to finish number 1 overall in 2025. Well, they're also doing work in 2026. They had some really talented prospects on campus this weekend, led by Jared Curtis, their top quarterback commitment. Also, number 1 offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell, he's uncommitted, and so is number 2 wide receiver Aaron Gregory. They were both on campus. What are you hearing about Georgia and some of these 2026 names?
Well, both had great visits. Talked to both Jackson Cantwell and Aaron Gregory. Cantwell loves his relationship with Stacey Searles, loves the way they develop massive offensive linemen, and just the caliber of football that they play. I think Georgia, I've been saying it on numerous episodes, I think they lead for Jackson Cantwell right now. Aaron Gregory, Texas A&M's a program he's high on. Georgia also at or near the top of the list. Another great visit, just loves the brotherhood of that program. Late in the week, I predicted on 300 edge Carter Lucky to Georgia. I think he'll ultimately end up being a Bulldog. Ryan Mosley from Carrollton High is a coveted safety for the Bulldogs. Certainly think Georgia's in a great spot there. They offered an in-state linebacker, Kamari Brooks, during his visit. Coach Chidera Uzo-Deripe and company turning it up for Kamari Brooks. So Georgia's certainly doing a good job there.
All right, Georgia fans, talk to us. Let us know how we're feeling after this big Auburn win. Lots of visitors on campus. More to come. Let us know how we're feeling about recruiting. All right, let's talk Jahkeem Stewart, because that was pretty much the big news of the weekend. The number one player in the 2026 class reclassifies up to the 2025 class. So he is now ranked as the number 14. So he goes from number 1 in 2026 to number 14 overall in 2025. Still a 5-star, still one of the best in America. So, Steve, this leads me to ask you, how much time is left in this recruitment?
Well, he's going to enroll early and announce his commitment in December, probably during the early signing period that begins on December 4th. And he's locked in 4 official visits beginning this weekend with a return trip to Oregon for the Ohio State game. Ohio State and Oregon are 2 of his finalists. LSU and USC are the other 2 finalists for him. He's going to be at the LSU-Alabama game. He's already been to 1 LSU game this fall, also camped at LSU during the summer. He's going to be at the USC-Nebraska game. He's been to Southern Cal several times. He also camped there in the summer with Coach Henderson and company. And then Ohio State's going to get the last visit for the Michigan game. He talked about Larry Johnson being the best defensive line coach in the country. These games are going to be pivotal. He wants to see how these teams play in some of the biggest games on their schedule, how they respond in those environments, how they're prepared. Now, when you start trying to gather intel and buzz around Jahkeem Stewart's recruitment, there's a lot of people in Louisiana and around the Tigers program that ultimately think LSU wins out. But when you talk to people in the Jahkeem Stewart camp, there have definitely been times where Ohio State's been considered the leader and USC's been considered the leader. I think there's some fluidity to this recruitment. We'll see what kind of move the Ducks make this weekend. He's called Dan Lanning a defensive mastermind. If they can beat Ohio State on Saturday, that could have huge ramifications in the recruitment of Jahkeem Stewart. If you're asking me today who I would give the edge to, my educated guess would be that I think ultimately I would probably point towards LSU. But again, I think Ohio State's led. I think USC is led. I think he's open to leaving the state. I think it's going to be an exciting finish for Jahkeem Stewart. These games are going to matter, and he's getting a chance to see Ohio State play twice, a massive road game and then a massive home game to end the regular season. So it's going to be an exciting finish for Jahkeem Stewart, who is enrolling early at the school of his choice.
Yeah, you're right. Ohio State actually going to have an opportunity to prove themselves twice because they are playing at Oregon. Now, of course, that game's in Eugene. They're not going to get to host Jahkeem Stewart on that visit, but they will get to watch that defense. So we'll see what happens. Jahkeem Stewart only has about 8, 9, maybe 10 weeks before he makes a decision. So this thing's going to come fast and furious. You guys, let us know, comment section below. How do you guys see this Jahkeem Stewart recruitment playing out? Let us know, comment section below. All right, Steve, let's talk Oregon Duck recruiting, because Oregon's 5-0 as Ohio State comes to town, and they played on Friday night. So let's go all the way back to Friday. And they had some key 2026 targets on campus, none bigger than edge Zion Ely. They also had Thomas Davis Jr. What are you hearing on some of the 26 guys that were on campus for Oregon?
Well, I think they lead for Zion Ely. He was also there for Oregon's Saturday Night Live camp at the end of summer. He had another great visit, loves what Oregon's doing schematically, what Dan Lanning has done historically as a head coach, and the vibe he gets around the program. So I think Oregon continues to set the tone in that recruitment. Aiden Harris is the number 1 defensive lineman in the country per the On3 industry. He's out in North Carolina. Weddington, him and his twin brother Andrew, along with Thomas Davis, visited this weekend. Ohio State is the On3 RPM favorite for the Harris twins, but Oregon's recruiting him as an edge player. He likes that, had a great visit out there. And then Jaira Edwards is Zion Ely's teammate, the number 5 safety in the land. He too was at Saturday Night Live in July. Oregon, one of the programs setting the tone early in his recruitment.
All right. Now, this weekend, Jahkeem Stewart's not going to be the only 5-star visitor on campus. Naeem Offord will also be on campus. I thought this was kind of interesting, Steve, because Naeem Offord is committed to Ohio State. He's visiting Oregon. He's yet to make it back to Ohio State for a visit this fall. And meanwhile, there's rumors swirling about Auburn. There's rumors swirling about Oregon. So what do you make of Naeem Offord visiting Oregon for the Ohio State game?
Well, he's been to Oregon a couple times already, so a chance to go out to Autzen Stadium and take in a game environment for the Ducks. He's been to 2 Auburn games this year. He's been to an Auburn football practice. It's close to home. Auburn's got some momentum in that recruitment right now, even though he's committed to Ohio State. But his dad has told me that Dan Lanning's his favorite coach. Lanning and the Ducks have certainly built some trust and some equity with the Offord family about how he would be treated and developed in Eugene. So they're excited to get back and take in a game atmosphere and continue to evaluate Oregon. They're the dark horse in this recruitment. Ohio State, obviously, look, they don't like that this young man's looking around, but this is a chance for them to go out there and play well on the road in front of Naeem Offord. And we know Ohio State's going to battle to the end for this 5-star recruit that did so last cycle with guys like Edric Houston and Juan, Jeremiah J.J. Smith, and held off Miami and Juan. So they'll try and do the same with Naeem Offord. They're trying to get him back up for the Nebraska game and then the Michigan game. Certainly wouldn't be surprising to see him back at Auburn again. Final decision is going to come late in the cycle. All 3 of these programs are alive. Depending on the day of the week and who you talk to, looks good for Ohio State. But obviously, he's been to Auburn numerous times, giving them all the opportunities to keep him home, keep him local. If they were having a better season, I think it'd be a foregone conclusion. But player development is a major component in his recruitment, and certainly Coach McGriff and company can point to some things that they've done historically. But Tim Walton over at Ohio State has a great relationship with the family, and the Buckeyes are rolling right now, so they still have those legs to stand out in this recruitment as well.
Yeah, well, this week it's Oregon for Naeem Offord. He's going to make that big visit that the Ducks staff has been anticipating for a while. Oregon fans, talk to Steve and I. How we feeling about the upcoming weekend with Ohio State coming to town? Who's the most important target you want to see in Eugene? Let us know. Comment section below. All right, Steve, let's talk some new RPMs on the recruiting prediction machine. You dropped them this weekend. There were some major developments across the country. Let's go down to Texas. Texas A&M making some noise on the offensive line. 2 huge Fong bombs dropped Sunday, I believe you put these in. So tell us about Lamont Rogers and Nelson McGuire.
Yeah, fired these. Did I fire them in Saturday or Sunday? I don't know. It was a wild weekend.
Yeah, it was a wild weekend.
Lamont Rogers, on 300 offensive tackle, currently committed to Mizzou. Mike Elko and company couldn't have been happier to have him back in College Station. They have the number 9 recruiting class in the country. Offensive line is a big point of emphasis moving forward as they try and continue to build this program up into championship caliber. 5 straight wins. This is Lamont Rogers' second time at Texas A&M this fall. Talking to several sources with knowledge of that recruitment, I like the way it's trending for Texas A&M. Now you have SMU, Oklahoma, a couple other programs battling, but I like where they stand with the Mizzou commit. It was timely to smash Mizzou with Lamont Rogers in the stands, and my predictions with the Aggies. And then Nelson McGuire is a fellow on 300 recruit in state. He stayed overnight, stayed into Sunday, had a great trip, loves the environment, the vibe he gets around the staff, the feel of the 12th man, being inside Kyle Field. Auburn at one point I thought was the leader. I'm pegging the Aggies as the leader right now. Auburn still battling, Clemson, Vanderbilt, a couple other schools to watch, but I like where Texas A&M stands with Nelson McGuire.
All right, and then you also had a interesting RPM for Jacob Bradford to LSU, and I say that's interesting because, one, he's committed to Houston, but he has a younger brother who's the number 1 safety in the 2026 class. So how does this all impact recruiting for LSU?
Well, LSU had a Louisiana recruiting weekend. A lot of their commits back on campus for officials. He was obviously not committed to that, but committed to Houston. Jacob Bradford, he's been to an LSU game this year already too. Said it was an outstanding official visit. Talked about the elite talent that he's around and the concentration in state, the hospitality, talking with Coach Olson, and being able to be versatile in LSU's defense are all things standing out. Talking to his dad about it as well, I get the sense that LSU is becoming the program he beats. So ultimately, I think that they will flip him from Houston. Blaine Bradford's obviously looking at places like Notre Dame, Alabama, but I think when you start adding that one up, LSU's probably going to be tough to beat for the number one safety in the country in 2026 as well.
All right, let's talk some Vanderbilt recruiting. I think this is going to be the first time on the Wiltfong Whip Around that we talk Vanderbilt recruiting, maybe the first time on the On3 Recruits channel, but Vandy, they are out and trying to take care of they are trying to capitalize on some of the momentum they have from beating Alabama at home. You got 4-star linebacker Austin Howard, RPM to Vandy. Who else?
Yeah, and he's a Mississippi State commit. I'm hearing that really started trending hard towards Vanderbilt, not this past weekend with the Alabama game, but the weekend before with the narrow loss to Missouri. Vanderbilt's had some heartbreakers this year to finally bust through, topple Alabama. Huge magnitude perhaps on the recruiting trail. Donovan Starr is a 4-star cornerback committed to Auburn. Alabama went and saw him play on Thursday, offered him a scholarship. Vanderbilt's been trying hard to flip him, talking about the trajectory program, the direction, and then to go out and beat Alabama was huge. He said that if they can beat Auburn later in the year, that'll really, really raise his interest for sure in Vanderbilt. Michigan and Illinois, a couple others in there for Donovan Starr. Stephon Shivers is a massive defensive lineman, committed to Georgia, maybe not committed to Georgia, just not going to sign with Georgia. I think Vanderbilt's in a good position there. Mm-hmm. They're trying to flip some guys. They got some major targets. 4-star receiver Davian Chandler's an Indiana commit that Vanderbilt likes a lot. Syracuse cornerback commit Zion Burdell is a name to know. Louisville in-state edge rusher commit Eric Hazard is someone Vanderbilt's pushing for. And then on 300 athlete Virginia Tech commit Sheldon Robinson out of Woodbury Forest is someone that Vanderbilt's getting some traction with. And then LeBron Hill is a 6'5" receiver that was committed to Purdue. He recently reopened his process. Vanderbilt's in the middle of that one as well. So the Doors have 9 commits right now, but in the mix for guys committed elsewhere, high-ranking guys, 4 stars on 300 recruits, and they toppled Alabama, and maybe that'll lead to some wins on the recruiting trail moving forward.
It sounds like they're going to fill that class up coming off this momentum from the Alabama game. Now, Alabama, so take us out with this one. Despite the loss, you still have a new prediction for Alabama recruiting.
Yeah, tight end Marshall Pritchett from Raven Gap, currently committed to North Carolina. He's been to Alabama a couple times, including the win over Georgia 2 Saturdays ago. Talking to sources with knowledge of that recruitment, I think he's ultimately going to end up with the Crimson Tide. Yes, Alabama lost the game this past weekend, but everything's still in front of them this year. Kalen DeBoer's only lost 13 games as a head coach in his career. Took Washington national title game last year. Pritchett loves his potential fit in that Alabama offense. Alabama has the number 2 class in the country. I think they ultimately add Marshall Pritchett to it. And that will do it for today's episode of the Wiltfong Whip Around. Thanks for tuning in. Please make sure you hit like and subscribe to the Odd3 Recruits channel so you're up to date on the latest and best recruiting intel in the country, from live commitments to the inside scoop with Josh Newberg, 5-star flex, great interviews with Phillip Dukes, the Recruit Reaction Show on Saturdays following the biggest games in college football. And then, of course, the Wiltfong Whip Around every Monday and Thursday. And we will be back on Thursday to preview some of the biggest recruiting weekends of the country. It's Oregon, Tennessee, and LSU, among others, will certainly have top prospects. Notre Dame for Stanford on their campuses Saturday. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you out Thursday.